So these are all of the chemicals required for this propellant. One note is that this video is not intended or should be ever used as a guide or tutorial in creating your own propellants. And also, I would strongly advise you to not try this at home. If you ever handle these chemicals in the future, please ensure that you're wearing proper protective gear such as gloves, eye protection, and respirators, as these can be serious health hazards. We start by adding in our E51 epoxy resin, 669 thinner, epoxy fatty acid methyl ester, and copper oxide into the mixing bowl. Then, we want to ensure that the 4 ingredients are thoroughly mixed. The next step is to add in our ammonium perchlorate. Ideally, you should add AP into the bowl in different batches and mix in between to avoid it escaping into the air. Once AP is added, the mixture becomes a highly flammable substance, so handling it requires extra care. We want to continue mixing until the mixture reaches a paste-like state. Then, we need to degas the propellant. I am using a 2 liters per second vacuum pump to do this. And to anyone who doesn't have a vacuum pump and is wondering whether you can skip this step, well, nope, because here is what happens. So please make sure you do a good job degassing the propellant. Our final step will be to add in our 593 hardener. Once it has been added, the clock starts ticking, as the hardener starts to react with the epoxy resin. After thorough stirring, we have to degas the propellant again. I find it necessary to repeat this process various times to minimize the air bubbles within the grain. At this point, the propellant is ready to be stuffed into our mold. Here we have our entire rocket laid on the floor, and let's have a quick rundown. Starting from the very bottom, we have our engine bay. So this is the engine that will power our rocket, and here we have the 2 propellant grains. The engine will be pushed directly into the rocket and held in place by pure friction. Moving up, we have our onboard camera, which will slide right into the rocket and record out of this little hole drilled through the airframe. Moving just a few centimeters up, we have our avionics, which is responsible of opening the parachute at the right time. Once the battery is connected, it'll go into a standby mode. When a high G-force present during the launch is detected, the system will become armed and wait until the rocket falls 10 meters past its apoapsis. At that time, the avionics will light the E-match that is connected through this port. The match end is connected to a nylon string and will burn through the string once lit, which will let go of the spring inside the parachute bay and eject the parachute as well as the nose cone of the rocket out. Finally, we have our supposed GPS compartment inside the nose cone. However, I decided to throw out our GPS and use that space to store a special cargo. I know you may be wondering about the GPS part, so let me explain. One of the most important goals of this launch is to carry the graduation wishes of my classmates. And of course, I planned a space to store these wishes, and it is under the camera compartment right here. However, what I didn't expect was that it was almost nearly impossible to take the camera compartment out once it was put inside the rocket. So, I had to make a choice. I was either going to fly without the wishes and have a high chance of recovering the rocket, or I would fly without a GPS and stuff the graduation wishes inside the GPS compartment, which is right here. And you'd think it would be a hard decision for me? And of course not, because I was going to fly without a GPS. Simple choice. So, how would I recover the rocket? Well, hear me out. You see, here we have our little rocket, and it will launch into the sky. From here on, there are 2 primary outcomes, assuming that it doesn't explode on the pad. First one is that the parachute system fails to deploy, and the rocket free falls to the ground to give a random horse or cow a birthday surprise. This actually makes the recovery process easier, as I could roughly estimate the impact point of the rocket based on the initial launch parameters. I would really only need to search a sector area to find the rocket that fell downrange. The second case, the rocket has its parachute successfully deployed, and it would drift off into the wind and probably land far, far away. However, I believe that I will still be able to spot the bright orange parachute and chase the rocket as it falls to the ground. Seems like a perfect plan, right? I wonder what did go wrong. So we packed our stuff and headed to the grasslands. I'd have to admit that this isn't exactly the most majestic way to transport a rocket. It felt like carrying a bazooka. As we left our home in Beijing, the city skylines slowly faded behind us. Buildings gave way to mountains and then gradually opened into wide plains. After a 6-hour drive, we finally arrived at the grasslands. I set up the rocket and carefully loaded it onto the launch rig. With everything in place, we were ready for launch. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ignition. As you may have noticed, there were a few seconds of combustion before the engine started to provide thrust. This is a problem that has been noticed during previous testing, and is mainly due to the low port-to-throat area ratio. Just a few grams of black powder would have fixed it, but I admit I was a bit too lazy and didn't really want to address it. Nevertheless, the launch was a success. After the rocket shot up, I frantically scanned the skies, hoping to catch a glimpse of the orange parachute. But nothing appeared. 2 minutes passed, still no sign. At this point, I started to suspect that the avionics malfunctioned and didn't pop the parachute out, so I began searching the predicted impact area. For the next half hour, I searched the entire sector where the rocket would have landed in the event of a parachute failure, but there was no trace. The rocket was officially lost, and since I swapped out the GPS, there was no way for me to locate the rocket. Looking back, I now believe that the parachute indeed deployed, but the rocket climbed far higher than expected and was carried away by strong high-altitude winds. The previous altitude was predicted using data of potassium nitrate and sorbitol, but this time I used an AP-based mix, which likely pushed it much higher into the sky. I really wanted to see the in-flight footage recorded by the onboard camera, but that, along with the rocket and the wishes of my friends, vanished into the vast open sky.